Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God." The clerk's voice was perfunctory, a rote recitation of a script heard 1,000 times in this chamber. But today, the words seemed to hang in the air with a peculiar weight. The atmosphere inside Senate Hearing Room 216 was not merely tense, it was pressurized. The air smelled faintly of old lemon oil from the polished mahogany tables and the sharp, metallic tang of nervous sweat. Senator John Kennedy's voice rolled across the room like distant thunder over the Louisiana bayou. Slow, measured, and deceptively calm. It was a voice that had disarmed witnesses for decades, a folksy instrument that made smart people nervous and foolish people confident. Representative Ilhan Omar, standing at the witness table with her hand raised, was about to discover which category she fell into. "I do," Omar said. Her voice was steady, her chin raised in a posture of practiced defiance. She had been here before, in a sense. She was a veteran of the cable news circuit, a warrior of the Twitter timeline, and a central figure in the progressive squad. She was accustomed to attacks, accustomed to the vitriol of her opponents, and she believed she knew exactly how this hearing would go. She expected grandstanding. She expected shouting. She expected a partisan circus that she could clip for social media to rally her base. She lowered her hand and took her seat. The irony of the moment, a Muslim congresswoman swearing on a Christian Bible, about to be interrogated by a Southern Baptist constitutional scholar, was lost on no one. The press gallery was standing room only. Photographers from every major wire service jostled for position, their lenses focused like sniper scopes on the woman in the purple hijab and the man with the wire-rimmed glasses. Senator Kennedy adjusted those glasses now. He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he reached under the dais and produced a single thick manila folder. It was worn at the edges, stuffed to capacity with documents, tabs protruding from the sides in a chaotic array of colors. He laid it on the mahogany desk with a heavy thud that echoed through the silent room. Omar's gaze flicked to the folder, then quickly away, fixing her eyes on the senator. "Ma'am," Kennedy began, leaning forward slightly. "Before we begin, I want to make something crystal clear." His Louisiana drawl was thick as molasses, wrapping around the vowels, softening the edges of his words until they sounded almost like a lullaby. But his eyes, magnified behind his lenses, were as sharp as broken glass. "Back home, we have a saying," Kennedy continued, a small, humorless smile playing on his lips. "Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining." Now, I expect straight answers today. Simple questions, simple answers. Can you do that for me? The gallery held its collective breath. This was the Kennedy brand, folksy, eccentric, but lethal. To his right, Senator Josh Hawley suppressed a smirk. To his left, Senator Ted Cruz clicked his pen, ready to write. Omar's lawyer, a high-priced partner from a K Street firm, leaned in and whispered something urgently in her ear. Omar nodded, her expression tightening. "I will answer your questions, Senator," she said, her tone clipped. "But I will not be subjected to—" "Oh, you will be subjected to questions, ma'am," Kennedy interrupted softly. "That is why you are sitting in that chair. That is how hearings work. We ask, you answer. The Constitution has been doing it this way for 237 years. I don't reckon we will change it today just for you." Kennedy removed his glasses and folded them with deliberate, agonizing slowness. He placed them on top of the folder. "Now then," he said, "let's begin with September 11th, 2001. You remember that day? Representative Omar? The question landed like a grenade. The room went very, very quiet. This wasn't going to be a policy debate on immigration reform or foreign aid. Kennedy wasn't interested in the present. He was dragging the witness back to the most painful scar in the American psyche. "I remember it," Omar said cautiously. Kennedy nodded. He opened the folder. Papers spilled out. Transcripts, financial documents, photographs, social media printouts, an avalanche of evidence organized with the surgical precision of a man who had spent his life in courtrooms. He picked up a single sheet of paper, holding it up to the light, so the watermark of the official seal was visible to the cameras. "Representative Omar," Kennedy said, reading from the page, "on March 23, 2019, you gave a speech to the Council on American-Islamic Relations, also known as CAIR. I have the transcript right here." He looked over the paper at her. "You said, and I quote, CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something, and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties." End quote. Kennedy set the paper down gently. He folded his hands. "Some people did something." He let the words hang in the air, isolating them, stripping them of any context or excuse. "Ma'am," Kennedy said, his voice dropping an octave, "can you help me understand what you meant by that?" The trap was set. The hearing had officially begun, and Ilhan Omar was already on defense. The cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing the micro-expressions of a politician realizing that her usual rhetorical shields might not hold against the storm that was about to break. The silence in Senate Hearing Room 216 stretched for 3 agonizing seconds, then 5. It was the kind of dead air that makes live television producers nervous and trial lawyers smile. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Ilhan Omar leaned toward her microphone. She had prepared for this. Her communications team had briefed her on how to handle the 9/11 question. The strategy was simple. Pivot to victimhood, cite context, and attack the premise of the question as Islamophobic. "Senator," she began, her voice gaining a practiced strength, "that quote has been taken out of context repeatedly by right-wing media to vilify me. I was speaking about the Muslim American community's experience after 9/11, about how we were collectively blamed for the actions of extremists, about how our civil liberties were stripped away in the name of security." "Ma'am, I just read you the full sentence," Kennedy interrupted. His voice wasn't angry. It was puzzled, as if he were trying to solve a riddle. "That was the context. I read the words you said." He picked up the transcript again. "But please enlighten me," Kennedy said. "What context exactly makes 'some people did something' an appropriate description of the murder of nearly 3,000 Americans?" Behind Omar, in the first row of the public gallery, a woman in a black dress gripped a folded American flag in her lap. Her knuckles were white. She was a Gold Star widow. Her husband had been a firefighter in Tower 1. They never found enough of him to fill a casket. She stared at the back of Omar's head, her eyes burning with 23 years of grief. "I was emphasizing the backlash," Omar insisted, her frustration leaking through. "The point of the speech was about the loss of rights for Muslims." "I understand that is what you wanted to talk about," Kennedy said, holding up a hand. "But the question remains. Nearly 3,000 people were vaporized that day, murdered by 19 terrorists who hijacked 4 commercial airliners in a coordinated attack on our nation. And you described that event as 'some people did something.'" Kennedy reached under his desk and pulled out a new document. This one was larger, mounted on a stiff board. a poster-sized chart containing a list of names. "Let me read you some of those some people and somethings, if I may," Kennedy said. His voice changed. The drawl evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline precision. "Stephen Gerard Mulder, firefighter, age 33. He left behind a wife and 2 daughters, ages 4 and 6. He ran up the stairs while everyone else ran down. Waleska Martinez Rivera, office worker, Tower 1, age 37. She was 5 months pregnant. Her unborn child died with her. Benjamin Keefe Clark, chef, age 39. He stayed behind to help evacuate the kitchen staff. He saved hundreds. He died. Mark Joseph Keohane, junior at Boston College, age 21. He was on American Airlines Flight 11, going home to see his mother." Kennedy paused. He looked at Omar, his eyes unblinking. "I could keep going, ma'am," he said softly. "I have 2,177 more names in this binder. Would you like to hear them? Because these are the some people you referenced. And what they experienced wasn't something. It was murder. It was mass murder. It was an act of war." The room was absolutely still. Even the camera shutters had stopped clicking, the photographers seemingly paralyzed by the gravity of the moment. Omar's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear again. She shook her head slightly, waving him off. She knew she had to respond. "Senator," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have the deepest respect for anyone who lost someone on September 11th. That day was a tragedy. It was horrific, and we should never forget it." "But you already did forget it, ma'am," Kennedy countered instantly. "When you reduce the slaughter of thousands to some people did something, you forgot it. When you use their deaths as a rhetorical stepping stone to talk about yourself, you forgot it." He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Now, I am going to ask you something very simple," Kennedy said, "and I would appreciate a direct answer. No speeches, no pivots, just a yes or no." He waited until he was sure the cameras were tight on her face. "Can you say the following sentence for me? September 11th, 2001 was an act of war committed by Islamic terrorists who murdered 3,000 innocent Americans." The challenge hung in the air. It was a perfect political snare. If she said it, she validated the terminology, Islamic terrorists, that she and her progressive allies had spent years arguing was Islamophobic. If she refused, she proved Kennedy's point that she was incapable of condemning terrorism without qualification. Omar took a sip of water. Her hand shook, the water rippling in the glass. "Senator," she began, choosing her words with agonizing care, "I believe we need to have nuanced conversations about the root causes of violence and—" "That is not the sentence I asked you to say, ma'am." Kennedy's voice hardened like cement. "I asked you to state a simple fact. Was September 11th an act of war? Yes or no?" "It was a terrorist attack," she conceded. "Committed by whom?" "By Al-Qaeda." "And Al-Qaeda was motivated by what?" Pause. A long, suffocating pause. "By extremist ideology," she said finally. "What kind of extremist ideology, Representative?" Kennedy pressed. The lawyer was shaking his head vigorously now. "Don't answer. Don't answer." "I don't think it is productive to label an entire religion based on the actions of a few," Omar deflected. "Islamic extremism," Kennedy said it for her. "That is the answer. The 19 hijackers were motivated by radical Islamic extremism. That isn't controversial, ma'am. That is history. Osama bin Laden said it himself. He put it on video. Why can't you say it?" He pulled out another piece of paper, a handwritten letter. "This is a letter from the families seated behind you," Kennedy said, gesturing to the gallery. Gold Star families. They are asking you, respectfully, to acknowledge what happened that day in clear, unambiguous terms, to stop minimizing it. Kennedy's face softened, but it was the mercy of an executioner offering a blindfold. Ma'am, I am 72 years old. I am from a generation that was taught to respect our elders, respect our flag, and respect those who have sacrificed. These families have sacrificed more than most of us can comprehend. The least, the absolute least, you could do is look them in the eye and say the words. Can you do that, Representative Omar? Or is "some people did something" as much respect as you are willing to give? In the gallery, the Gold Star widow began to cry quietly. The sound was small, but in the silence of the hearing room, it was deafening. Kennedy closed the first section of his folder. He didn't need an answer. Her silence had screamed louder than any speech she could have given. "I'll take your non-answer as an answer," Kennedy said. "Let's move on." He reached for the next stack of documents. These bore the seal of the state of Minnesota and the Department of Homeland Security. "Let's talk about your family tree," Kennedy said. Senator Kennedy placed a new stack of documents on the mahogany desk. These pages were different. They bore the heavy official seals of the Minnesota Department of Health and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They were vital records, the kind of paperwork that doesn't lie, because lying on them is a federal felony. "Representative Omar, let's talk about your family for a moment," Kennedy said. His tone shifted perceptibly. The preacher was gone. The forensic accountant had taken his place. "You arrived in the United States as a refugee from Somalia in 1995, correct?" "Yes," Omar said, her guard instantly up. She knew where this path led. It was the territory of right-wing blogs and conspiracy theories, or so she had always claimed. "And you came with your family, your father, Nur Omar Mohammed, your siblings. You settled in Minneapolis, correct?" "Yes." "Good. Good." Kennedy flipped through the papers, licking his thumb to separate the pages. "Now, in 2002, you applied for a marriage license with a man named Ahmed Hirsi, but you didn't finalize it legally at that time. It was a faith-based marriage. Is that right?" "It was a faith tradition, yes," Omar said. "In the Muslim community, that is common." "Understood," Kennedy nodded. "So, in the eyes of the state of Minnesota, you were single, but you had 2 children with Mr. Hersey in 2003 and 2006. His name is on their birth certificates." "Okay. So, fast forward to 2009, Kennedy said. "You legally married a different man, a British national named Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. You had a civil ceremony, filed the license, made it official with the state, correct?" Omar's lawyer leaned forward, whispering urgently. The scratching of pens in the press gallery was the only sound in the room. "Yes," Omar said tightly. "I married Ahmed Elmi in 2009. "Thank you for confirming that." Kennedy pulled out a document and held it up. "This is the marriage license filed in Hennepin County. Your signature, his signature, all legal and proper." He set it down, then took off his glasses. "Now, here is where I get confused, ma'am. And maybe you can help me out, because I am just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana, and family trees can get mighty tangled." Kennedy picked up a document that looked much older, the paper grainier. According to multiple public records, birth certificates, school enrollment forms from St. Paul Public Schools, Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi shares a father with you. The air was sucked out of the room. "His father is listed as Nur Saeed," Kennedy said, reading from the transcript. "Your father's name is Nur Omar Mohammed, but in the Somali naming convention, Nur Saeed is often used. In fact, Before you took the name Omar in 1995, your legal name was Ilhan Noor Saeed. Kennedy looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. Ilhan Noor Saeed and Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi. Same father, same date of birth on the immigration forms. He let the implication hang there, heavy and suffocating. Ma'am, according to these documents, the man you legally married in 2009 is your biological brother. The room exploded. Photographers surged forward, lenses clicking furiously. Senator Cory Booker shot to his feet. "Mr. Chairman," Booker shouted, "this line of questioning is based on unverified internet rumors and is beneath the dignity of this committee." "Sit down, Senator," the chairman said, banging the gavel. "The witness is under oath. She can answer." Omar's lawyer was standing too, his face red. "This is a racist smear. It has been debunked." "Has it?" Kennedy asked. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at Booker. He looked only at Omar. "Because if it has been debunked, you can end this right now." Kennedy reached under his desk. He pulled out a small, white rectangular box. It looked like medical packaging. "This is a DNA test kit," Kennedy said. 23andMe, very popular, very accurate, 99.9% precision. He held the box up to the cameras. "If Ahmed Elmi is not your brother, this little plastic tube will prove it definitively. No more questions, no more conspiracy theories. You swab your cheek. We get a sample from Mr. Elmi. We compare them. If you aren't siblings, I will personally apologize to you on the floor of the Senate." Kennedy placed the kit on the edge of his desk, just out of her reach. "Will you take the test, Representative Omar?" It was the legal definition of a kill shot. If she took it and failed, she went to prison. If she refused, she looked guilty to the entire world. "I will not dignify this," Omar hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "It is a disgusting, xenophobic attack on my family." "Ma'am, DNA doesn't have a race," Kennedy said softly. "It is science, pure science. If you are telling the truth, you should be begging to take this test. It is your golden ticket out of this mess." He paused. "Unless you aren't telling the truth." "I am not taking your test," she said, crossing her arms. "Noted," Kennedy said, picking up his pen and writing on his legal pad with deliberate strokes. "Refused DNA test." "Let me be clear about why this matters," Kennedy continued, his voice hardening. "If you married your brother to commit immigration fraud, to get him a green card he wasn't entitled to, that is a federal felony. Multiple felonies. Marriage fraud, visa fraud, perjury. And here is the kicker," Kennedy added. "When you obtain citizenship through fraud, that citizenship can be revoked. It is called denaturalization. You could be deported, ma'am, sent back to Somalia." He looked at the DNA kit sitting on the desk. "Are you sure you don't want to take the test?" "Move on, Senator," Omar said, her eyes fixed on the table. "As you wish," Kennedy said. "But the American people can see exactly what just happened. You had a chance to clear your name. You declined." He closed the file on the family tree. But he wasn't done. "Let's talk about the money," Kennedy said. Senator Kennedy reached for the next folder. This one was thicker, overflowing with spreadsheets and receipts. It was the paper trail of a life lived far beyond the means of a public servant. "Let's talk about Tim Minot," Kennedy said, shifting gears seamlessly. "Your current husband." Omar's expression tightened. The DNA question had been an attack on her past. This was an attack on her present. "Mr. Minot is a political consultant," Kennedy noted. "He runs a firm called the E Street Group. Is that correct?" "Yes," Omar said. "And your campaign has paid his firm quite a bit of money, hasn't it?" We paid for legitimate consulting services, Omar replied, reciting the line she had used a dozen times in the press. Legitimate, Kennedy repeated the word, tasting it. Let's look at the numbers. He motioned to an aide, who placed a large placard on the easel behind him. It was a bar graph. According to Federal Election Commission filings, public records, ma'am, your campaign paid the E Street Group $2.8 million between 2019 and 2020. Kennedy pointed to the towering bar on the chart. The average congressional campaign spends about $50,000 to $100,000 a cycle on general consulting, Kennedy said. You paid your husband's firm $2.8 million. That is 28 times the average. Now, let's look at the timing, Kennedy said, pulling out a court document. This is the divorce filing from Mr. Minett's ex-wife, filed in August 2019. In it, she states under oath that her husband confessed to having an affair with you in April 2019. Kennedy looked at the timeline. April 2019. That is the exact same month the payments to his firm started skyrocketing. $50,000, then $75,000, then $150,000. We had a professional relationship, Omar insisted. Oh, it became professional, all right, Kennedy drawled. Let's look at what that $2.8 million bought. He pulled out a stack of receipts, enlarged and mounted on foam boards. Receipt A, the Four Seasons, Los Angeles. 2 nights, $1,700. Billed to the campaign as strategy consulting. Kennedy looked over his glasses. Ma'am, I've been in politics 40 years. I have never had a strategy session that required the Four Seasons. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Omar didn't smile. Receipt B, the St. Regis, New York, presidential suite, $3,600. Campaign expense, donor outreach. Were the donors in the suite with you? Kennedy asked. Or was it just you and Mr. Minott? These are legitimate travel expenses, her lawyer interjected weakly. They are personal expenses, Kennedy corrected sharply. You were having an affair. You were traveling the country with your boyfriend. And you were paying for the hotels, the first-class flights, and the dinners using money donated by working-class people who thought they were fighting for justice. That is wire fraud, Kennedy said. It is conversion of campaign funds. It is stealing. He laid out the pattern. You take donor money. You pay it to your husband's firm as a vendor. He takes a profit. That profit becomes your household income. You are laundering campaign donations into your own pocket. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You campaign on being a voice for the poor. You tell people you understand their struggle. But you are living in a $3,000 a night suite, while your constituents are standing in line at a food bank. He pulled up a split-screen image on the monitor. On the left, Ilhan Omar at a luxury resort in the Maldives, captioned, Living My Best Life. On the right, a photo of a homeless encampment in Minneapolis, in her district. Do you see the disconnect, Representative? Kennedy asked. Or does the view from the St. Regis make it hard to see the street? Omar stared at the photos. Her face was flushed with anger. This is about my work, she said. I work hard for my constituents. You work hard for yourself, Kennedy countered. You have turned your seat in Congress into a lifestyle business, and the shareholders are you and your husband. Kennedy closed the financial folder. The weight of the evidence was piling up on the table. Immigration fraud, tax fraud, campaign finance fraud. But money is just greed, Kennedy said, his voice shifting again, becoming somber. Greed is a common sin in this town. What I want to talk about next is something much darker. He reached for the final folder. It was black. Let's talk about hate, Kennedy said. Let's talk about the Benjamins. Senator Kennedy opened the black folder. He did not slam it down. He treated it with a strange, reverent delicacy, as if the contents were radioactive or sacred. His entire demeanor shifted. The sharp-edged prosecutor vanished, replaced by a somber man speaking in the hushed tones one might use at a funeral. "Representative Omar," Kennedy said, looking over the rim of his glasses. "Money is a common sin in this town. People get greedy. It happens. But what I want to talk about now is something much darker. I want to talk about hate." He pulled out a stack of printed screenshots. They were magnified tweets, the blue checkmark next to Omar's name clearly visible. "February 10th, 2019, Kennedy read. "You tweeted, 'It's all about the Benjamin's baby,' in reference to American political support for Israel. Do you remember that tweet?" "Yes," Omar said, her jaws setting. "I was talking about the influence of money in politics. Lobbying. It is a legitimate policy critique." "Benjamins," Kennedy repeated. $100 bills. You were suggesting that American politicians only support the Jewish state because they are being paid off. That Jewish money buys control. That is what you meant, wasn't it?" "I was talking about AIPAC," she deflected. "They are a powerful lobby." "It is a trope, ma'am," Kennedy said softly. "One of the oldest, ugliest lies in history. The idea that rich Jews control governments with secret money. It has been used to justify pogroms. It has been used to justify expulsions. It was used to justify the Holocaust." He placed the tweet on the desk and picked up another. "November 16th, 2012. You tweeted, 'Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel.'" Kennedy looked at her. Hypnotized, like a magician, like a sorcerer, another classic anti-Semitic trope. The crafty Jew deceiving the simple Christian. Do you see the pattern? "I was a young woman when I wrote that," Omar said, dismissing it with a wave of her hand. "I was expressing frustration with a war." "You were 30 years old," Kennedy corrected. "Old enough to know better." He reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a tweet. It was a letter, handwritten on stationery from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. "This is a letter from a man named Samuel Goldberg," Kennedy said. "He is 94 years old. He lives in Maryland. He survived Auschwitz. He lost his mother, his father, 3 sisters, and 2 brothers. 63 relatives total. Murdered." Kennedy's voice cracked slightly. Just a fracture, but in the silence of the hearing room, it was thunderous. "Mr. Goldberg wrote to you after your Benjamin's tweet. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He asked you, respectfully, to understand how your words echoed the propaganda he heard in Germany in the 1930s. He begged you to stop using the language of his tormentors." Kennedy held the letter up to the cameras. "You never responded to him, Representative. He is 94 years old, and you couldn't be bothered to write back." "I received thousands of letters," Omar said, though she looked down at the table. "I am going to read a part of it," Kennedy said, putting on his reading glasses. "Dear Representative Omar, I saw where words like yours lead. I saw the cattle cars. I saw the smoke, all because people believed that Jews controlled the world with money, that Jews hypnotized the world. Please, do not walk this path." Kennedy took off his glasses. His eyes were wet. "Does that mean anything to you?" "I condemn all forms of bigotry," Omar said mechanically. "I have faced bigotry myself as a Muslim woman. I know what it feels like." "You fight bigotry unless it is coming from you," Kennedy countered. "Then it is nuance. Then it is policy. Then it is everyone else being too sensitive. He pulled out a final document for this section. It was a list of endorsements. Do you know who loved your tweets, Representative? Do you know who thought, "It's all about the Benjamins" was a brilliant insight? He read from the list. David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the KKK. He called you the most important member of Congress. The Daily Stormer, a neo-Nazi website. They praised your courage. Hamas state media. They called you a hero. Kennedy looked at her with pity. When the KKK, the neo-Nazis, and Hamas are your fan club, maybe, just maybe, you should reconsider your positions. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. I'm going to ask you one question, and I want a yes or no. Do you believe your statement, "It's all about the Benjamins," was anti-Semitic? I believe it was a critique of lobbying that was misunderstood, she said. So, no, Kennedy said. Even though the Anti-Defamation League said it was. Even though your own party passed a resolution condemning it. Even though a Holocaust survivor begged you to see it. You still think you were right. I think the conversation around Israel is policed differently than other countries, she insisted. That is the problem, ma'am, Kennedy said, closing the black folder. You don't see the hate in your own heart. You only see it in others. Senator Kennedy took a sip of water. He seemed to reset himself, shaking off the heaviness of the previous questioning. When he spoke again, his voice had returned to that folksy, deceptively simple drawl. The country lawyer looking over a ledger. Let's talk about debt, Kennedy said. Student debt. You talk about it a lot. You've made it a centerpiece of your brand. The struggling immigrant, working her way through college, crushed by loans, can barely make the payments. Is that a fair summary of your position? It is a reality for millions of Americans, Omar said, finding her footing on policy ground. I have been open about my own struggle. I owe nearly $70,000. It is a burden. 70,000, Kennedy nodded sympathetically. That is a lot of money. Real burden. I can see why it weighs on you. He picked up his smartphone from the desk. I've been looking at your Instagram account, Representative. You are very active. Lots of photos. You document your life pretty thoroughly. He tapped the screen, and an image appeared on the large monitors in the room. June 2021. The photo showed Omar sitting at a table with a stunning view of a skyline at night. The caption read, Dinner at Nobu. Living my best life. I looked up the menu at Nobu Dubai, Kennedy said. The omakase tasting menu is $375 per person. With wine and tip, that is a $1,000 dinner for two. He swiped to the next image. July 2021. Omar standing on a white sand beach, wearing a designer swimsuit cover-up. Caption, Vacation mode activated. This is the Soneva Johnny Resort in the Maldives, Kennedy noted. The overwater villas start at $1,800 per night. Minimum 3-night stay. He swiped again. August 2021. Paris. A photo of Omar holding several shopping bags. The logo on the bags was unmistakable. Louis Vuitton. Kennedy set the phone down. Now, Representative, help me with the math. You have $70,000 in student debt that is crushing you. You say you can't afford to pay it, but you are eating $400 dinners, staying at $1,800 a night resorts, and shopping for luxury handbags in Paris. Omar's face flushed. Those trips were facilitated. I have a life. I am allowed to enjoy myself. Facilitated by whom? Kennedy asked sharply. By your husband's consulting firm? By donors? Or are you paying for them out of your own pocket? I work hard, she snapped. Let's look at the income, Kennedy said, pulling out a whiteboard marker. He walked over to an easel. Your congressional salary is $174,000 a year. After taxes, let's say you take home $120,000. He wrote the number on the board. Rent in D.C. You live in the Navy Yard, correct? Luxury building. Let's call it $3,000 a month. That's $36,000 a year. Student loan payments on $70K. Standard repayment is about $600 a month. That's $7,200 a year. Kennedy did the subtraction. That leaves you with $76,800 in disposable income. Cash. After your housing and your loans are paid. He turned to face her. Ma'am, do you know what the median household income in the United States is? Total? Before taxes? It varies, she murmured. It is $74,580, Kennedy said. You have more money left over after your bills are paid than most American families earn in an entire year. He pointed to the photo of the Maldives. You aren't struggling, Representative. You are wealthy. You are in the top 5% of earners worldwide. But you pretend to be poor because it is politically useful. You keep that debt around like a pet. It makes you relatable. Look at me. I have loans, too. Kennedy pulled out a statement from her loan servicer, obtained through the disclosure filings. This is your payment history. You are making the minimum payments. Only the minimum. You could pay this off in 3 years if you stopped going to Nobu. You could be debt-free. But you don't want to be debt-free. You want the grievance. Kennedy leaned against the easel. You make $174,000. Your husband's company got $2.8 million from your campaign. You travel first class. You wear designer clothes. And you want the plumber in Louisiana, who didn't go to college, to pay off your loans? That is the policy, Omar said, her voice rising. Universal forgiveness. It isn't universal, Kennedy said. It is a transfer of wealth from the working class to the leisure class. And you, ma'am, eating sushi in Dubai while your constituents stand in food bank lines in Minneapolis. You are the leisure class. Pay your own damn loans, Kennedy said, his voice hard. Like everybody else. The gallery erupted in spontaneous applause. The chairman banged the gavel, but his heart wasn't in it. Kennedy walked back to his desk. He had stripped away the victimhood, the poverty narrative, and the moral superiority. There were only 2 folders left, and the next one was a small blue book. Senator Kennedy reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket. He did so with a slow, ritualistic deliberation, drawing out a small, blue-bound booklet that was frayed at the edges and bent at the spine. It was an object that had clearly traveled thousands of miles, been held in sweaty palms during stump speeches, and been consulted in the quiet corners of the Senate cloakroom. Representative Omar, Kennedy said, holding the object up to the light so the gold lettering caught the glare of the cameras. Do you know what this is? Omar glanced at it, her expression weary. It is a book, Senator. It is the book, ma'am, Kennedy corrected gently. The United States Constitution. I carry this everywhere I go. I keep it right next to my heart. I read it regularly because I took an oath to support and defend it, just like you did. He set the small booklet on the mahogany desk with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. Do you have a copy, Representative? I probably have one in my office, Omar said dismissively. You probably have one, Kennedy repeated, his eyebrows arching high above the rim of his glasses. Ma'am, this is the operating manual for your job. It is the contract between you and the people who pay your salary. But you probably have one somewhere. He shook his head, a gesture of disappointed fatherly concern. Let's see how well you know it. We'll start simple. The First Amendment. What does it protect? Freedom of speech, Omar answered quickly. Freedom of religion. Keep going, Kennedy urged. Freedom of the press. Keep going. There was a pause. Omar shifted in her seat. I would have to check the exact text for the others. Freedom of assembly, Kennedy recited, ticking them off on his fingers. And the freedom to petition the government for a redress of grievances. 5 freedoms. You got 3. That is a 60%, Representative. In Louisiana schools, that is a failing grade. He flipped the booklet open, his eyes scanning the text he already knew by heart. Let's try the Second Amendment. What does it say? It protects the right to bear arms, she said, her voice flattening. She knew this was a trap. Full text, please, Kennedy requested. It is only 1 sentence. I don't recall the exact wording, Senator, but I know it has been interpreted to allow unchecked violence in our streets. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, Kennedy recited. He looked up. You have called the Second Amendment outdated. You have introduced bills to severely restrict it. How can you call something outdated if you don't even know what it says? He motioned to the screen. A video clip began to play. It was Omar at a town hall in Minneapolis, dated March 2023. Video Omar. The Constitution is a living document. We need to reinterpret it for modern times. The Second Amendment made sense when we had muskets. It doesn't make sense now. It is an obstacle to progress. Kennedy stopped the video with a remote. The image of Omar froze on the screen, her mouth mid-sentence. Ma'am, the Constitution is not a menu, Kennedy said, his voice sharpening. You don't get to order the First Amendment because you like protesting and send back the Second Amendment because you don't like guns. It is a package deal. It is a covenant. It was written by slaveholders, Omar shot back, her patience fraying. It is an imperfect document. It was written by geniuses who created a mechanism to end slavery, Kennedy retorted. A mechanism you swore to protect. He flipped further into the booklet. Article 1, Section 8. Do you know what that covers? Silence. Congressional powers, Kennedy said. Your powers. The specific, enumerated list of things Congress is allowed to do. Lay and collect taxes. Pay debts. Provide for the common defense. Regulate commerce. He looked up, peering over his spectacles. Do you know what is not in there, Representative? Socialism, government control of health care, the Green New Deal, redistribution of wealth. The founders were very specific. If it isn't in this book, the federal government can't do it. That is the 10th Amendment. We have implied powers, she argued. The General Welfare Clause. The General Welfare Clause is not a blank check for you to remake society in your image, Kennedy said. You want to fundamentally transform America. You want to abolish the Electoral College. You want to pack the Supreme Court. You want to federalize the energy sector. Kennedy leaned back, tapping the blue booklet with a rhythmic thud, thud, thud. That isn't constitutional, ma'am. That is authoritarianism dressed up as progress. You don't want to serve under this Constitution. You want to rewrite it. He pulled out one final document for this section. It was a printout from a study conducted by the Congressional Research Service, anonymized but coded. The CRS tested freshman members of Congress on basic civics, 3 branches of government, separation of powers, checks and balances. Kennedy slid the paper across the table. You scored in the 12th percentile, Representative. That means 88% of your colleagues understand the government better than you do. I am not here to take a quiz, Omar snapped, pushing the paper away. No, Kennedy agreed. You are here to answer for why you are trying to dismantle a system you don't understand. You swore an oath, hand on a holy book, to support and defend this Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a whisper. But you can't defend what you don't know, and you won't support what you don't respect. He slipped the Constitution back into his pocket, close to his heart. You are driving the bus, Representative, Kennedy said, but you never took driver's ed. The air in the hearing room had changed. The earlier tension, the sharp crackle of a legal duel, had dissipated, replaced by something heavier, more suffocating. It felt less like a courtroom and more like a confessional. Senator Kennedy stood up. It was a breach of protocol. Senators usually remained seated behind the high dais, looking down on the witness. But Kennedy walked around the side of the desk, moving down to the floor level. He stood just 10 feet from Ilhan Omar. He wasn't looming over her. He was facing her, man to woman, citizen to citizen. Representative Omar, Kennedy said. His voice was quiet, intimate, stripped of the folksy affectations. This was the voice of a man asking the only question that truly mattered. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. He took a step closer. The camera zoomed in, catching the bead of sweat on Omar's temple, the tightness in her jaw. When you wake up in the morning, Kennedy asked, who do you serve? Omar blinked. She looked at her lawyer, then back at Kennedy. I serve my constituents in Minnesota's 5th District. No, Kennedy said gently. I didn't ask for your job description. I asked about your heart. Who do you serve? Where is your loyalty? He began to pace slowly in front of the witness table. Because here is what I have seen today, Kennedy said, ticking points off on his fingers. I have seen someone who dismisses 9/11 as some people did something. I have seen someone who refuses to take a DNA test to prove she didn't marry her brother. I have seen someone who funnels millions of dollars to her husband's company. I have seen someone who traffics in anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish money. And I am trying to figure out, Kennedy continued, stopping directly in front of her, who that person is working for. He looked up at the ceiling, as if searching for the answer. Is it Somalia? Kennedy asked. Because you told a Somali television station in 2018, and I quote, I am here to put Somalia's interests first. Your words, ma'am, not mine. Is it the Squad? Kennedy asked. Because you vote with them 100% of the time, even when it hurts the interests of your own district. Is it yourself? Kennedy asked, his eyes snapping back to her. Because you sure do seem to live well. First-class travel, luxury hotels, designer clothes, while the people you claim to represent are struggling to buy eggs. Omar opened her mouth to speak, but Kennedy held up a hand. I am going to give you one chance, he said. One chance to clear all of this up. One chance to show the American people who you really are. He leaned in, resting his hands on the edge of her table. I am going to ask you the simplest question in the world. A question that every immigrant who has ever taken the oath of citizenship has answered. A question that every soldier who has ever put on a uniform has answered. The room went deathly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Representative Omar, Kennedy said, do you love America? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It was a trap, perfect in its simplicity. If she said yes, she contradicted years of rhetoric about America being a racist, imperialist, oppressive colonial power. If she said no, she confirmed every suspicion about her loyalty. If she dodged, She proved she couldn't say the words. Omar's eyes darted around the room. She looked for an exit. There was none. "Senator," she began, her voice halting, "I think that is a complex question that requires nuance. I love the promise of America. I love the ideal of what America could be. But I also recognize that America has committed atrocities, that it was built on stolen land, that it has oppressed." "So that is a no," Kennedy said. He didn't shout it. He said it with a profound sadness. "You don't love America," Kennedy said. "You love your idea of a different country, a country that doesn't exist yet, a socialist country, a country without borders, a country that isn't America." Kennedy walked back to his desk and picked up a photograph. It was an old, grainy image of a young girl in a refugee camp in Kenya. She was thin, her eyes wide with fear, dust coating her skin. "This was you," Kennedy said, showing the photo to her. 12 years old, fleeing a civil war, starving, terrified. He held up a second photo, a glossy headshot of Omar in Congress, wearing a colorful hijab, smiling, powerful. "And this is you now." Kennedy placed the photos side by side. "America did this," Kennedy said. "America saw a frightened little girl in a refugee camp and said, 'Come here. We will give you a home. We will feed you. We will educate you. We will give you a voice. We will let you rise to the highest levels of power.'" Kennedy's voice trembled with emotion. "And how do you repay that generosity? By calling us racist, by mocking our faith, by attacking our allies, by dismantling our history, by spitting on the very Constitution that protects your right to sit in that chair." He sat down heavily in his chair behind the dais. "In Louisiana, we have a saying," Kennedy said. "You can't love someone you don't respect, and you can't respect someone you are constantly trying to change into something they are not. You don't love us, Representative. You tolerate us. You use us. You profit from us." Kennedy gathered his files. The interrogation was over. He hadn't just won the argument, he had exposed the soul of the witness. "I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy said quietly. "I think we have heard everything we need to know." Omar sat frozen. She had expected a fight about policy. She had expected a debate about tax rates. Instead, she had been put on trial for ingratitude, and the verdict was written on the faces of everyone in the room. She had survived war. She had survived poverty. But she had no defense against the truth of her own life. Senator Kennedy did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply arranged his papers into a neat stack, the edges perfectly aligned, and looked up at the committee chairman. "Mr. Chairman," Kennedy said, his voice carrying the finality of a closing argument, "based on the testimony we have heard today, and the refusal of the witness to provide exculpatory evidence regarding her immigration status, I have a motion." The room went silent. This was the procedural kill shot. "I move that this committee formally refer Representative Ilhan Omar to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation into potential immigration fraud, marriage fraud, tax evasion, and perjury," Kennedy stated. "I further move that we refer her statements and financial records to the House Ethics Committee for immediate review regarding potential violations of the Code of Official Conduct." The chairman, a Republican from Wyoming who had let Kennedy run the show, nodded solemnly. "Is there a second?" "Second," said Senator Josh Hawley, his voice sharp. "All in favor?" "Aye." It was a chorus from the Republican side of the dais. "Opposed?" The chairman looked to the Democratic side. Senator Cory Booker stared at his hands. Senator Gary Peters looked at the ceiling. To vote no was to go on the record defending a woman who had just refused a DNA test to prove she hadn't married her brother. It was political suicide. There was silence. Not a single nay was spoken. "The motion carries," the chairman announced, banging the gavel. "The referrals will be sent by close of business today. This hearing is adjourned." Kennedy stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up his manila folder and his pocket constitution, and looked at Omar one last time. "Representative," he said, his tone devoid of malice, "I genuinely hope you are innocent of these allegations. I hope the investigations clear you. I hope I am wrong." He paused, letting the moment hang in the air. "But I don't think I am." Kennedy walked out of the hearing room through the side door reserved for members. He didn't look back. Behind him, the room erupted into chaos. Reporters breached the velvet ropes, shouting questions. Photographers surged forward, their flashbulbs creating a strobe light effect around the witness table. And in the center of the storm sat Ilhan Omar. She was frozen, clutching her water glass, staring at the empty chair where Kennedy had been. For the first time in her career, she looked small. The hearing was over, but the reckoning had just begun. The video clips hit the internet before Kennedy even reached his office. Fox News broke into regular programming. Breaking: Kennedy destroys Omar in explosive hearing. The Chiron ran on a loop. Omar refuses DNA test, admits affair funded by donors. Tucker Carlson, broadcasting from his independent platform, devoted his entire opening monologue to it. "For years," Carlson said, his face filling the screen, "we were told that asking questions about Ilhan Omar's past was racist. Today, John Kennedy asked the questions, and the silence was the loudest answer we have ever heard." CNN tried to spin it. Their headline read, "Omar faces intense questioning in contentious Senate hearing." But the panel discussion told a different story. Even their own legal analysts looked uncomfortable. "She did not handle the DNA question well," one strategist admitted on air, shaking his head. "If it's not true, you take the test. Refusing it, that's a problem." MSNBC went full defense mode. "Racist attack on Muslim Congresswoman," the banner screamed. But the ratings tanked in real time. Viewers were tuning out the excuses. They wanted to see the receipts. On Twitter, X, the algorithm caught fire. DNA test trended at #1 globally. Omar resign hit #2. Kennedy for president, a hashtag nobody had expected, hit #5. Conservative accounts flooded the timeline with clips of Kennedy's "Do You Love America?" trap. Liberal accounts tried to rally, posting threads about Kennedy's voting record, but they were drowning in a sea of memes contrasting Omar's luxury vacations with her food bank constituents. By 5 p.m., the political fallout began to manifest in concrete ways. The Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, DFL, issued a statement. It was a masterpiece of political distancing. "We support due process and believe every elected official must be held to the highest standards of transparency. We will be monitoring the situation closely." Read between the lines, "We are preparing to dump her." By 6 p.m., a challenger emerged. Don Samuels, a moderate African-American former city councilman who had nearly beaten Omar in the last primary, announced his candidacy for the next cycle. "We need a representative who represents all of us," Samuels said in a video released on social media. "Not just one ideology, and not someone who is more interested in being a celebrity than a public servant." His campaign raised $500,000 in 4 hours. The money wasn't just coming from Republicans, it was coming from Jewish Democrats, from moderate liberals, from people in Minneapolis tired of the drama. By 7 p.m., the Department of Justice confirmed they had received the Senate referral. A spokesperson issued a terse, one-line email. The department takes all congressional referrals seriously and will review the evidence provided. It wasn't an indictment, but it was the next best thing. Official federal scrutiny. The gears of the bureaucracy were beginning to turn, and unlike a Twitter mob, they could not be blocked or muted. By 9 p.m., the final blow fell. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker Emerita and the matriarch of the Democratic caucus, issued a statement. She had defended Omar countless times, shielded her from censure, and whipped votes to protect her. Not today. Representative Omar has been a valued member of our caucus, the statement read. However, the allegations raised today are serious. We hope she can resolve these legal matters quickly, so as not to distract from the important work of the House. Translation: Resign before you take us all down with you. Omar sat in her apartment in D.C. that night, watching the coverage. The squad rallied around her. AOC tweeted about misogyny. Rashida Tlaib called it a witch hunt. But their tweets were getting ratioed into oblivion. The progressive shield had cracked. The evidence Kennedy laid out was too specific, too financial, too grounded in public record to be dismissed as bigotry. She looked at her phone. The notifications were a blur of anger. She turned it off. For the first time, Ilhan Omar realized she might actually lose. Not just an election, but her freedom. The next morning, the newspapers landed on driveways across America with the heavy thud of history being written. The New York Post, The Reckoning. The cover featured a full-page photo of Omar looking devastated at the witness table, with Kennedy peering over his glasses in the inset. The Wall Street Journal, Kennedy questions. Omar on fraud allegations. Senate refers to DOJ. The New York Times, hearing highlights Omar's controversies. Even the Times, usually sympathetic, couldn't spin the refusal to take a DNA test. The editorial board called for clarity and transparency regarding her immigration file. Senator Kennedy gave only one interview. He appeared on Fox News with Brett Baier during prime time. He didn't look triumphant. He looked weary. "Senator," Baier asked, "some are calling this a political hit job. What do you say to them?" Kennedy smiled that gentle, disarming Louisiana smile. "Brett, I just asked questions. She provided the answers. If those answers made her look bad, that is not my fault. That is the truth's fault." "Do you believe she committed crimes?" Baier pressed. "I believe there are serious questions that need serious investigation," Kennedy said carefully. "That is what we do in the Senate. We refer matters to appropriate authorities. We let the process work." "But personally, Senator, what do you think?" Kennedy looked directly into the camera. The folksy demeanor vanished for a second, replaced by the steel of the man who had cornered her in the hearing room. "I think Representative Omar doesn't love America," Kennedy said. "I think she loves the idea of remaking America into something it isn't. I think she has used her position to enrich herself while claiming to fight for the poor. I think she has trafficked in anti-Semitism while claiming to fight bigotry. And I think the American people deserve better." He leaned forward. "They deserve representatives who actually represent them, who actually serve them, who actually love this country. Representative Omar is not that person." The clip went mega viral. 50 million views in 24 hours. It became the definitive soundbite of the modern conservative movement. Stand with Kennedy. Fundraising emails raised millions for Republican candidates nationwide. In the weeks that followed, the walls began to close in on Ilhan Omar. 1 month later, the Federal Election Commission, FEC, announced a formal expansion of their investigation into the E Street Group payments. Subpoenas were issued for Tim Mynett's bank records. 2 months later, the Department of Justice opened a preliminary inquiry into the immigration fraud allegations. It wasn't a grand jury yet, but FBI agents were seen interviewing members of the Somali community in Minneapolis. 3 months later, polling from Minnesota's 5th District showed a collapse. Omar's approval rating had dropped from 62% to 48% in a single quarter. Her disapproval spiked to 46%. In a deep blue district, she was statistically tied with a moderate challenger. Focus groups revealed the damage. Voters weren't angry about her policies. They were angry about the hypocrisy. "I don't mind that she's liberal," one voter said. "I mind that she lives like a queen while telling us we're oppressed." 6 months later, the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board referred her case to state prosecutors for potential misuse of funds. Omar tried to fight back. She went on a media blitz, wrote op-eds, and held rallies. But the specter of the Kennedy hearing haunted her. Every interview eventually turned to the DNA test. Every town hall featured a question about her husband's payments. She couldn't escape the narrative Kennedy had built, brick by evidentiary brick. And through it all, Senator John Kennedy kept working. He didn't take a victory lap. He didn't write a book about taking down the squad. He simply returned to his office in the Hart Building, sat down at his desk, and went back to work on the Appropriations Committee. In his office, on the corner of his desk, the pocket Constitution sat in a place of honor, its blue cover worn soft by years of use. Next to it was a framed black-and-white photograph. It showed a young John Kennedy at his graduation from Louisiana State University Law School. His father's hand was resting on his shoulder. Both of them were smiling, tired but proud. Under the photo was a small brass plaque with an inscription in Latin, Lex ratio effectuum expers. The law is reason free from passion. Kennedy believed that. He lived that. And in room 216, he had proved it. He hadn't taken down Ilhan Omar with insults. He hadn't used slurs. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't succumbed to the anger that defined so much of modern politics. He had taken her down with facts. He had taken her down with receipts. He had taken her down with the relentless, unyielding application of logic. He looked at the Constitution one last time before turning off his desk lamp. The truth, he thought to himself, didn't need to shout. It just needed to be heard. And finally, after years of noise, the truth about Ilhan Omar had been heard loud and clear.